So a quick overview again of the female reproductive system. To give you a quick tour, here is the bladder, and then below the bladder is going to be the urethra. Now sitting on just on top of the bladder is going to be the uterus, and that's what you're seeing here. So you can see how thick the muscle is in the myometrium. And just at the inferior opening of the uterus is going to be the cervix. And then here's at the base of the cervix that kind of looks like a little smiley face. That's going to be the fornix. And then inferior to that is going to be the vaginal canal. And looking at the next view, we'll be able to see the fallopian tubes and the ovaries. Okay, so looking at a frontal view, again, this is just an overview of everything we've been talking about. Here's the uterus again, here's the cervix, and vaginal canal is going to be below that. Up above, here are the fallopian tubes or the uterine tubes, and remember that they enlarge at the end, and that's going to be the infundibulum, and then that has those little fringes on it, and that's going to be the fimbriae. So the goal with that is to catch the egg that's going to be released from the ovary during ovulation. A couple other things just as a review that you can see on this. Attaching the ovary to the uterus is going to be the ovarian ligament, which is going to be right there. And then there's going to be two other ligaments that are going to hold the uterus up. So this large area that you're seeing right here, that's going to be the broad ligament. And then there's also going to be a round ligament right here. Both of those are going to help to hold up the uterus, and that's very important during pregnancy. Also, a quick review. This is showing an image of the ovary, and I'm sorry that the labeling is kind of formatted weird, but let me walk you through this. Alright, so looking at the ovary, here's all these teeny tiny little primordial follicles. And remember, the primordial follicles are the eggs that are in the primordial follicles are going to be suspended in prophase 1. Then, as FSH is going to be released, FSH is going to target one of these follicles, and it's going to cause the follicle to mature, and then the egg is inside of that. So over time, as everything is maturing, here's the mature egg that's on the inside, then you're going to have luteinizing hormone released, and luteinizing hormone is going to weaken the wall of the follicle, and then it's also going to be responsible for ovulation. So once ovulation occurs, the egg and that first polar body are going to be hopefully caught by the infundibulum, and those are going to move down the fallopian tube or the uterine tube. So once the egg has left the ovary, then you have this empty follicle that's left inside, and luteinizing hormone tells that empty follicle to fill in with specialized cells. Then it becomes a corpus luteum. So that corpus luteum, once it forms, is going to produce progesterone. So if pregnancy occurs, that corpus luteum is going to be maintained. If there's no love connection and sperm doesn't meet egg, then that corpus luteum is just going to shrivel up and become a corpus albicans. And over time, it's just going to form a little pocket of scar tissue. So this is where we left off last time. Started talking about the reproductive cycle, and the term that we discussed was menarche, which is going to be a female's first reproductive cycle. So onset of puberty and first period or menses. Menopause is the end of ovulation and menstrual period, and that usually begins 35 years after the first period. walking through the stages of the menstrual cycle. First of all, let me say that normal menstrual cycle is going to be 28 days. Okay, so most women mark the menstrual cycle as happening at their period, but that's actually the end of it. So once the period is over, that begins a new cycle. So estrogen levels are going to increase during that first week of the menstrual cycle, and when those estrogen levels go up, the endometrium, which is the inner lining of the uterus, is going to get thicker. So again, it's making a cozy little house on the inside of the uterus in case there is a pregnancy that occurs. And so that's what's going to be happening in the uterus. And then at the same time, the follicle in the ovary is starting to mature and it's starting to increase estrogen that's being released. So that's going to keep LH from being released. Day 14 is usually when ovulation is going to occur. That's an average. It isn't always on day 14. All right, and then after ovulation is when that corpus luteum forms. So the follicle is going to be empty after the egg is released. So then the LH causes that empty follicle to fill in with specialized cells and become the corpus luteum. So that's where the progesterone is going to be produced. So progesterone is going to maintain the endometrium and help support a possible pregnancy. And this is a really key point. When estrogen and progesterone are high, luteinizing hormone at FSH are going to be inhibited. So they're antagonistic. So just the opposite with estrogen and progesterone dropping, then you're going to have FSH released and then luteinizing hormone is going to be released. So if a pregnancy does not occur, then that corpus luteum, as I said, is going to become the corpus albicans. And so it just shrivels up, and that means that when you aren't maintaining the corpus luteum, that progesterone levels drop, estrogen levels drop, and then you don't maintain that thick, cozy endometrium. So once menses occurs, which is a period, that means that the endometrium is sloughing off just a little bit of a time, and then there's going to be bleeding with that. So the period usually lasts 3 to 5 days, and as I said, that marks the end of a reproductive cycle. So make sure you know the length of time for the average entire menstrual cycle, and then also how long menses usually lasts. Now for some good stuff. Talking about different things that can prevent a pregnancy. So looking at birth control, one of the things is going to be coitus interruptus, and the common name for that is going to be withdrawal. So withdrawing the penis from the vagina prior to ejaculation. Not very effective means of birth control. So that one's referred to as a behavior type of reproduction. Another type is a rhythm method. So with that, the couple abstains from sexual intercourse 2 days before and 1 day after ovulation. So the couple has to track the menstrual cycle very, very closely. And if it's close to day 14 when ovulation is going to occur, then there is no sexual interaction during that time. The problem with that method is that a female may have a very stressful month, a change in eating habits, intense workout, something like that, and it will change ovulation. So if the female ends up being delayed with ovulation, then it increases the chance of having a pregnancy occur. So a lot of times couples that practice the rhythm method end up being parents. Now with mechanical barriers, the goal is to keep the sperm from entering the cervix or entering the female reproductive tract. So condoms are a very common example of a mechanical barrier. Male condoms are definitely more common than female. Female condoms aren't as popular in the United States. It's a bag, and I'll show you a picture of this in just a second. It's a bag that actually fits into the vaginal canal, and it has some flexible rings on each end, and it actually covers the external genitalia as well. Another example of a mechanical barrier is going to be the diaphragm, and it's pretty flexible, and it has a flexible ring as well. And I have samples of this if you would like to see them in after lecture. So it's dome shaped, and it actually cups over the cervix where the fornix is. That was that little smiley face around the base of the cervix. There's different sizes, and they have to be fitted by a doctor so that you get the right fit. And this one can be effective. It is cheaper because it's reused, but it has to be left in for several hours after intercourse. And then another modification of a diaphragm is called a cervical cap. It's just going to be smaller than the diaphragm, and it just suctions directly onto the cervix. So that one isn't as popular, but it can be effective. And actually, there's a long history with the cervical cap. During different ancient time periods, they would use lemon peels, any kind of vegetable or fruit that had a really thick rind to it. They would take that and insert it into the vaginal canal to try to block the sperm from entering the cervix. There was even one point in history they would use a really thick handmade paper and shape it to be a cervical cap as well. So here's an example of the male condom, which is much more commonly used in the United States. And here is a female condom. It's significantly larger, so it would be closed at this end, even though it has the flexible ring. And then this side actually fits over the external genitalia. One of the benefits of a female condom is that if a female does have herpes or some kind of external lesions on the genitalia, then this would cover most of that, so it would prevent a partner from becoming infected. And if you're interested, this is a link that will take you to Planned Parenthood, and there's a little video clip showing how a female condom works, and it should give you the pros and cons of using one, so if you're interested. And here's an image of a diaphragm. Kind of looks like a little shower cap for your cat. So here, this is the flexible ring that's on the outside, and it suctions onto the cervix, so it covers quite a bit of area. So usually that one's used with the spermicidal jelly as well, and the goal is to block the opening completely into the cervix. There are a number of chemicals that can be used. They're spermicidal. There's spermicidal foams, creams, and jellies, and usually those are used in conjunction with condoms or diaphragms, so not as effective if used by itself. So this is showing other kinds of spermicidals. There's going to be these spermicidals are embedded in wax, and so that can be inserted into the vaginal canal. Here's a sponge, and this is a mechanism that's used to insert some of the jellies or the little capsules. So these are going to be those chemical spermicides. Now, an IUD or intrauterine device, they've gained popularity in the last 5 to 10 years. It's a small kind of T-shaped structure, and I'll show you an image of that. It's actually inserted through the cervix, and there's a string attached to it. So it's going to be floating around on the inside of the uterus, and if it's copper, if it's made of copper, it's spermicidal. But a lot of them contain hormones like the marina. And the goal with that, if it has those hormones, it prevents ovulation, and then it can also prevent an implantation of the fertilized egg because it's constantly scraping the inside of the uterus. So here's one example of an IUD. This one happens to be copper, so they're either going to be T-shaped or sometimes they have kind of a curve like that. That's what the marina looks like. And usually the ends, the T part of it is hinged, and so it'll squish down, and that's going to be inserted into the cervix. And so the string that you're seeing here actually hangs out of the cervix, and then it's trimmed so it's not extending very far. So this one's actually an example of the marina, which is used more frequently in the United States, and this is showing you the position of where it would be inside of the uterus. Now these two are both going to be permanent means of birth control. Tubal ligation, or if a female has her tubes tied, the uterine tubes or fallopian tubes are going to actually be cut, and then they're cauterized, which means that they're burned, or they tie off the ends of it. And that completely blocks the pathway so that the egg can't meet where the sperm would be. One of the things that they're using now, it's not as popular, but they can put this coil inside, they can place this coil inside of the uterine tube, and it just forms solid scar tissue around that coil, and so that blocks the sperm and egg from meeting as well. And then in a male, the vasectomy, the vas deferens is going to be cut, and so the sperm don't leave with semen. So they still produce semen, it just doesn't have any sperm in it. Now, when they do a vasectomy, usually it's done as an outpatient. So what they'll do is make a small cut in the scrotal sac, and they go in and they just snip the vas deferens on each side. And usually they are going to cauterize or burn it, but sometimes they'll suture it. So it's a relatively minor surgery. And here's an image of the tubal ligation. So this one, they make small incisions in the abdomen, and they go in, and again they're going to cut the uterine tubes. And this one's showing them tying them off. So that's one practice that they can do. But the whole point of this is once ovulation occurs, the egg's going to go in, and it's completely blocked. There's a roadblock there. So when sperm is coming up, there's a roadblock there, and they can't meet, so no pregnancy. So I want to talk for just a few minutes about pregnancy and prenatal development. As far as fertilization, I've mentioned that fertilization occurs in the fallopian tube or the uterine tube. That's where it usually occurs. Now, sperm can live up to 3 days inside of the female reproductive tract, and the egg, once it's released with ovulation, will only survive a maximum of 24 hours. Usually, even by 12 hours, moving closer to the 24-hour mark, it's already not quite as viable. So there's a narrow window of time each month for a female to get pregnant. All right, so we had previously talked about oogenesis, and if the egg is fertilized by the sperm, then you end up with a zygote. So that occurs in the fallopian tube. So that zygote, which is the fertilized egg, is diploid. So that's what's going to actually become the baby. All right, so this is showing you the path. So here you can see semen that's deposited close to the cervix, and if it's close to time of ovulation, the cervix actually has a thinner mucus that's being secreted, and it kind of opens up the pathway a little bit more for the sperm to get in. So sperm are deposited, and as they start to move up through the uterus, they have to decide if they're going to go this direction or this direction. So some of them will go up the wrong tube. So when a female ovulates, it's only going to happen typically in one ovary each month. Textbook cases, female will ovulate from the left ovary one month and then the right ovary the next, and they'll just alternate. But that isn't always the case. So sperm is moving up the uterine tube. Here's the little egg, and then the egg is going to be hopefully caught by the infundibulum, and it's moving down. So where they meet is where it's going to fertilize the egg. All right, so one more thing that I want to mention. After ejaculation, when the sperm are released into the female reproductive tract, the semen actually kind of coagulates or gels for just a little bit, and that's significant because that soft gel plug keeps the sperm close to the opening of the cervix. So it just kind of gets thick for a little while, and then it actually thins out again. So the purpose of that, like I said, is to keep the sperm close to the opening into the uterus, so it increases the chance of the sperm finding the egg. All right, so here's an actual image of the egg and all of these sperm that have made its way to the egg. So as we mentioned previously, on the sperm, there's that acrosome. And so all of these sperm that have found the egg, they're all going to release their enzymes from the acrosome, and they're all trying to break down this outer force field, if you will, around the egg. And then one little sperm will actually penetrate, and then it shuts it off again, so all of those sperm can't get in at the same time. So we have a zygote that forms, and that's going to happen in the uterine tube. And about 30 hours later, it's going to start to divide by mitosis. So that's the cleavage stage. So now that zygote is going to be dividing by mitosis. So you get 2 cells out of that, then they divide into 4, and it's slowly moving down closer to the uterus. So the morula is going to be the 16-cell stage. So as it's moving down, it's going to form a blastocyst, which is a hollow ball, and the outer layer becomes the trophoblast. The inner mass is going to become the embryo. So implantation occurs about 6 days after fertilization. So the trophoblast secretes enzymes that break down the endometrium, and then it starts to put down roots. It's actually implanting inside of the lining of the uterus. And then it starts to produce human chorionic gonadotropin, HCG, and that's what's going to be detected in a pregnancy test. So the reason they tell you to sample the first urine of the morning is because that HCG is going to be more concentrated. Because early on during pregnancy, you're not producing very much of that. So once the trophoblast starts to produce HCG, it starts to produce more and more and more of that, and that sends kind of a positive feedback up to the ovaries so that it maintains that corpus luteum. You got to keep those progesterone levels high so that it keeps a cozy little environment inside of the uterus. All right, so this is a great diagram showing you this process. So ovulation occurs, and then you have the sperm meeting the egg, and once it gets rid of that other set of polar bodies with meiosis II, then you have the zygote, and then it's going to start to divide by mitosis. So here's your 2-cell stage, 4-cell, all the way to a marula. And then as it's starting to migrate into the uterus, it kind of squishes down in the middle. So what you're seeing here, all of the stuff that's in light blue, that's what's actually going to become the baby. And then it's going to start to put down roots inside the lining of the uterus. That's when it starts to produce that HCG. So once it implants, it moves, the baby's going to move into the embryonic stage. And I do want you to know that that's week 2 through week 8. And there is so much activity happening during that time. From starting out with a single cell, now this is a multicellular organism. And during that time, all the framework is there for what will become the bones. And organogenesis is complete by 7 to 8 weeks. That means that all the primitive organs are already present by 7 to 8 weeks. The primitive heart actually starts to flutter at week 4 or week 5. So you can easily see that on an ultrasound. All right, so this is showing you organogenesis, so when some of those structures are going to develop. So heart is going to develop very early, and then the earbuds start to form, the eyes are all starting to form. Reproductive system takes a little bit longer. Central nervous system is very slow to mature, and it still has a lot of maturing to do even after the baby is born. The lungs are actually slow to mature as well. So if a baby is born prematurely, then they're possibly going to have respiratory distress. So if they think a pregnancy isn't going to go full term, if they think the mom's about to deliver early, they will try to give steroid shots 24 hours before the baby is delivered, because those steroids are actually going to help to speed up the lung maturation. So looking at the progression, and obviously this isn't quite to scale now, but this is the total length of the baby at 4 weeks. Doesn't look quite human. You can see this little tail stub. It's starting to have a head, and you can start to see the limb buds here that are forming. And at 5 weeks, there's a lot of growth. You can see the what's going to become the spinal cord. Still got that tail. But the arm buds are getting longer, leg buds are getting longer. Here's 6 weeks. By 7 weeks, still looks a little almost human-like. You can start to see little finger buds become more distinct, and toe buds starting to lose the tail, but the head is still really malformed at that stage. And this is a really cool image early on during pregnancy. You can see obviously all of the tissues that are forming. You can see how dense it is up here in white. That's going to become bone. None of that's formed back here, so it's much more clear. You can see the little eye buds. And I just want to mention that the baby's going to be protected in this thing that looks like a water balloon. That's going to be the amniotic sac. So that baby is going to be housed in that inside of the uterus for the entire pregnancy. Okay, here's an image showing a little bit further along, but you can see all the little ribs there. You can see how dark that is, so there's internal organs here. You can see the little umbilical cord and the little fingers. Here's the earbud. So all of that forms so early on during pregnancy. Now, determining the sex of the baby, you aren't really able to see this until a little bit later on. So very early on during fetal development, everything looks the same. When you're looking at this, again, you can't tell yet if it's going to be male or female. So in purple at the top, there's the glands, and tissue is starting to fold at the midline, but there's still an opening called the urethral groove right there. Then, if the baby's going to be male, that's when you have testosterone being produced, and so it causes that tissue to fold on the midline, and it causes the penis to enlarge until everything is completely fused right at the midline. If it's female, the the external structure is going to shrink in size because there's no testosterone, there's estrogen. And so this shrinks, and that's what's going to become the clitoris. And all of this doesn't fuse at the midline. So it's left with a vaginal opening or an orifice. So looking at some time frames, moving into the fetal stage is going to be week 9 until birth. And at week 16, if baby is cooperating, that's when you're able to see the sex of the baby. But sometimes babies get kind of shy and they'll be sitting with their legs crossed, or they won't turn over, so then they may not be able to get an image of it, so they have to try again. At 20 weeks, the fetal heartbeat can be heard, and quickening begins at 20 weeks. So quickening means that the baby's big enough that when it's swimming around in the water balloon, in that amniotic sac, you can actually feel it. So this is showing you towards the end of pregnancy. And the uterus can increase like 16 times its normal size, and it takes up most of the abdominal pelvic cavity. So all of the organs kind of get squished to the side, and the uterus is sitting on top of the bladder, so it's squishing the bladder down, and so the female always feels like she needs to go to the bathroom. So all of the intestines are going to get squished out of the way, and so sometimes late in pregnancy there's going to be sluggish bowels or constipation because there's not much room in there. And then also the diaphragm is going to be right up here, so sometimes they have shortness of breath too because that baby can be pushing up on the diaphragm. So this is in a good position. So what you're seeing is blue, that's the amniotic fluid. And as everything's maturing in the baby actually drinks that amniotic fluid and then urinates it out, and then they drink it again. It's all sterile at that point, so it's no big deal. And then over here, you can see the umbilical cord. And here's the placenta. Now, on to labor. Green light, go. When a female starts to go into labor, the cervix dilates, and then they lose the mucus plug. So during the entire pregnancy, there's this thick mucus layer that actually closes the opening of the cervix. And that just makes sure that there's no bacteria or anything that gets in there. So in a textbook case, that's going to be lost. So they'll have what's called a bloody show, or mucus that's lost. And then, if all goes according to plan, the amniotic sac ruptures. So that's when her water breaks. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes they have to go in and rupture the sac. But if they break their water, then they're in labor. So then the uterus is going to start to contract, and that oxytocin gets released more and more frequently, and so the uterine contractions become more and more intense, and the goal is to get that baby out. So baby magically pops out, and then the placenta is delivered shortly after that. And then the next 18 years are sleep deprivation. Okay, so typical gestational period for pregnancy is supposed to be 40 weeks, but 38, 39 weeks, baby's still usually perfectly good to go if mom goes into labor at that point. But normal time frame is going to be 40 weeks. So this is showing the progression with this during labor. The amniotic sac ruptures, baby's in good position, head down, facing the back, and that's what you want. So the head delivers first, and then the body follows. And then this is showing you the umbilical cord and the placenta. That's going to be delivered after the baby. And then after the baby is born, obviously you have a newborn, and that's also referred to as the neonatal stage. And that's it, guys, the end. I'll be checking emails occasionally, so let me know if you have any questions, and we will take a test on Monday. Happy studying. Bye.